The manhwa begins at night in a manor, with gems glistening inside a bag. Our FL lost in thought ponders. I thought I was used to it by now, but it still felt awkward. It was probably because of how he stared at me like a hungry beast, with his gray-colored eyes. She gathers her thoughts, and just as she inquires about his whereabouts, he suddenly mentions the cheeks. He reaches for the arm of her chair and in under a second pulls her closer to him. As he stared deeper in her eyes, a grin of satisfaction spreads across his face, then he pulls back and explains. He tells her he has his gloves on and is wearing a uniform, so like it on his cheek that day. Confused, she suggests he could simply take his gloves off. However, he protests, stating it'll make his hands cold. She informs him she'll be checking his temperature and then brushes her hand across his forehead, taking into notice he's cold. However, he's definitely not as chilly as he used to be. Then, with a warm smile on her face, she informs him to let her know if it feels too hot. Almost immediately, blue flames surround them. Through the treatment, he chuckles softly as he questions. "You never changed, you? You know it would never feel too hot." She remains adamant and mentions his situation is getting better, so the treatment could suddenly feel hot one day. He takes her hand, assuring her he will never feel that way because she was always warm. Our FL is a transmigrator. At first she was no different from everyone else, but one day, she got into an accident because she was careless, but little did she know, her carelessness would pave way for something more concerning. She awoke and realized she regained the memories of her past life. She recalled how she had died at the age of 19 due to an accident, and that she was now in a novel called So Hard to Get. The novel revolves around how its characters continuously misunderstand each other's feelings. She used to be a big fan of books, especially fantasy romance novels, in her past life, and she loved how they would make her heart beat faster with anticipation, but sadly it took her living the life of the character to realize it wasn't so fun after all. In her present life, she sits across having a discussion with her older brother, who is also the male lead of the novel Haint Valerian. She drops a subtle hint, who knows, maybe the one she likes could turn out to be him, causing him to get flustered. She mentions she thought they were getting closer and had even upgraded to seeing each other in private, so maybe the person she was speaking about could be him. However, he immediately shuts her down, claiming he's way out of her league. She lets out a frustrated sigh, realizing there's just no getting through to him, and wonders how someone could be so impossibly slow. Also, because she was his sister, she was forced to see him do all kinds of meaningless stuff, including the kinds of things that were never revealed in the novel. Despite her frustration, she realizes she could never give up, as if she were to let the novel take its natural course, the main characters will never take the hint until at least 3 years, and if that's the case, she resolves, she might as well take things into her own hands to have some peace of mind. A year later, she congratulates the female lead of the novel, Sarin, on her wedding. She stands smiling in satisfaction as she reflects on her struggle over the last year. She rarely attended any social events since she was little, so she hardly knew Sarin at first, and that's why she had to start by asking Haint to introduce them. Surprisingly enough, they had so many things to relate to because they were of the same age, and after some time, they had become very good friends. Obviously, that also meant she went back and forth between the two lead characters continuously as a messenger to help their romance. But none of it matters anymore as she's finally about to get her reward. She asks Sarin if she's decided to go with that dress after all, remarking that it suits her well. Sarin with a smile reveals, "Yes indeed, I decided to wear the dress we chose together because you're one of the few people who know me really well." She informs her she'll go wait at the hall while she gets ready, and Sarin thanks her with a bright smile on her face for helping her prepare for the engagement ceremony. Sarin's family should have helped her with the preparations. However, her parents passed away when she was little, and her only remaining family, her brother, was far away. Sarin must have been very lonely living in the huge mansion all by herself, but once the engagement ceremony is over, it will be a happily ever after for her. All of a sudden, she's started from her thoughts by a man who urges them to let him in, claiming he brings news from the Duke Raffaello. Locked in the carriage, she questions what could be so urgent that it would require them sending it on the engagement day itself, when the Duke couldn't even bother to attend his beloved sister's engagement ceremony. As she draws near a conclusion, maybe he sent a letter of his blessing, she feels a chill creep up her body as the night passes. She thinks to dismiss her worries, after all they're heading for a happily ever after, but later that day, they received a letter from Sarin, announcing her wish to call off the engagement. Moments ago, the couples received a lot of congratulations on their engagement, and the two lovebirds were also sprinkled with holy water to help bless their union. It was clear on their faces that they were headed to a happily ever after. Oh, how long she had longed for that moment. Now she can finally catch a break. She wouldn't have to see her brother El drunk and making sad faces every day, or listen to her friends speak in tears about the hardships of her one-sided love, but that's not all. The villainess in the novel frames her for a crime when she discovers she's the common link between them, which nearly gets her killed. That incident was her main incentive to take matters into her own hands, and put an end to all of their misunderstandings. So now, as the messenger of love who tried so hard to make the engagement happen, the ceremony was the fruit of her labor. In the engagement ceremony, she squeals happily, knowing she wouldn't have to get accused of a crime anymore. She notices Sarin behind her and turns around happily, asking if she'd greeted all the guests already, to which she responds yes. Then she notices her gloomy expression and out of concern asks what is wrong, and Sarin, although hesitant, shares she must tell her something she already told Haint about. Curious, she searches around for Haint whilst questioning what she told him, only to find him who was smiling moments ago, panicking now. Sarin isn't any better. She lets out a groan in despair, only heightening her worries. She takes Sarin's hand and with a warm smile, as if to release the tension around, asks if Haint had done something silly again or said something silly that really hurt her. For the first time since her attempts to find out what's wrong, Sarin speaks up and hurriedly denies that. She notices her trembling hands, then after much contemplation, she reveals, Ginta. I think Haint and I might have to call off the engagement. With hesitation gleaming in her eyes, she finally shares if they end up calling off the engagement. She just wants her to know it's all because of her, but Ginta instead gently rests her hand on her shoulder and asks, Would you tell me what this is about, Sarin? She stops her sobbing and reveals, actually, a knight rode all the way from the north and delivered a letter from her brother. She mentions she was so busy getting ready for the engagement she only had a chance to open it now. She questions if it could have been the knight she'd seen earlier, then Sarin reveals, actually, her brother says he's against the engagement. She explains she'd expressed her desire to get married to Lord Haint, but he must have thought it was only a matter of expression, that she likes Lord Haint enough to get married. She also shares that she'd written to him about the engagement ceremony, but his response was he would never let her get engaged to a man he's never met. She staggers as she explains that doesn't mean she wishes to end things with Lord Haint like that. Suddenly she slips and a firm hand rests upon her shoulder, calling her name. She notices it's Lord Haint, and immediately he questions Ginta, demanding to know why she is giving her a hard time. Sarin, however, explains that wasn't what had happened, stating she just thought Ginta deserved to know as well. He mutters a silent "oh" in response as his gaze softens in defeat. A maid comes to her and whispers something into her ear, and instantly she turns around, stating she needs a moment. As they watch her leave, her brother asks her if she can follow her, but she's confused and asks if he isn't going to be the one who goes after her. But his response is pathetic. He shares his thoughts. He wishes he could go after her right at that moment and be by her side, but the only thing standing against that desire is the noble's love for gossip. He turns to his sister and mentions she also is aware of what'll happen if he were to leave the hall too, and with that she turns to take her leave, stating she'll be right back with a warm smile on her face. Ginta had thought she would be able to calm her down without causing too much trouble as always, but she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She was crying in the arms of another man who slowly parted her head, assuring her she's doing just fine and to just breathe, slowly assuring her everything will be fine. She stood in shock from the scene she was witnessing. The man, his eyes were hazy and fleeting as the fog. Those gray eyes, if he is someone Sarin can run to and cry on his shoulders, could he be Duke Raffaello? She reflects silently on how she's come across their portraits a lot of times at the Raffaello manor. Sarin was like an ever-sparkling lake compared to the Duke Raffaello, who seemed cold, indifferent and hazy, just like a fog. the portrait which had been painted when he was 19, but now he's 24 years old, and all the years he'd spent fighting the northern monsters would have made his body tough and strong, just like the knight standing there. The knight didn't have silver hair, however his eyes made it clear. Her lips loosen as she mutters, "I knew it, just looking at that threatening glare, he has to be the Duke Raffaello." He places on his helmet and she asks if he's leaving already, then he says yes, since he's already delivered the letter. He goes past her, and as he walks he mentions it seems she'd left the door open when she came in, so he'll help her close it. He stops his footsteps just in front of Ginta and then orders, "As you can see, her ladyship is crying, either come inside or stay out." He doesn't wait for her response and instantly shuts the door in her face, leaving her standing alone outside trying to recall past events. The Duke had inherited his title after he lost his parents at the age of 15, so he was forced to witness all the dark and dirty sides to high society at a very young age. Therefore, keeping Sarin safe from such things has always been his greatest priority, and for the same reason the Duke never complained when the Emperor practically sent him away to die. The imperial family constantly tried to put Aberg Raffaello under their control by seizing anything that would compromise him. Now she questions why he's here now, since the Duke was practically banished to the north and he never once left the place. She decides to go back in, but just as she's about to push the door open, it is opened from the inside, causing her to lose her footing and bump into the knight. But as she rests her hand on his armor, she is attacked by the chill of his armor, causing her to pull away instantly without any caution and drop to the ground. Sarin immediately rushes to her, asking if she's been standing there the whole time. Sarin gently pats her back while she remains on the ground crying in agony. The knight then offers an apology, stating he hadn't seen her there, and excuses himself, leaving them to speak alone. Once he takes his leave, Ginta turns to Sarin and shares, "Your eyes are all swollen and your makeup is ruined. People might think you were forced into marriage if they see you like this at the ceremony." She asks if it's really that bad, and Ginta offers a solution: they can still fix the makeup and cover it up. Inside, Ginta, pretending to not have noticed the Duke, asks if the knight had made her cry and if he's someone her brother had sent. Sarin, opening up immediately, continues, "Can you believe what my brother, I mean the knight, told me?" She reveals he'd brought another letter from her brother. She passes the letter to her and with a smile explains she didn't have the chance to read it carefully because she was too busy crying. Sarin tells her the knight told her he will be staying there for a month, so she thought to show the letter to her since she will eventually find out about. However, Ginta's face goes pale as she goes over the content of the letter. "Once all the preparations are made, the knight I sent will escort you back to the north." Immediately she declares it outrageous, thinking she couldn't possibly let Sarin go to the north, so she must discuss it with Aberg. Before she takes her leave, she pleads with her not to inform her brother about the letter yet, as she herself is yet to wrap her head around it. With that, she dashes out of the room, requesting for some time to herself for fresh air, and as she hurries down the corridor, she can't help but notice how things are progressing. In the novel, the Duke never called Sarin to the north, which means that only happened because she changed the story. Later, she arrives at a stable. Panting heavily, she recalls how the Duke arrived in a suit of armor, meaning he might have come on horseback, which is why she'd come to the stable. Just as she questions the possibility of him already leaving, she hears a loud noise coming from the stable. She goes into the stable, hesitation evident in each step she takes as she wonders what if something had happened there, but to her surprise, the moment she takes a peek into one of the rooms, she notices the Duke collapsed on the ground. She leans in closer and notices he's currently suffering from demonic energy poisoning. Demonic energy poisoning is a condition which only exists in the north, however it is yet to be discovered in the story, but an alchemist supposedly discovered it by chance 2 years later. Nobody ever knew of the condition in the past because it only occurred to people who weren't native to the region but had stayed in the north for a long period of time. Also, exposure to the demonic energy of the northern region could corrupt the mana of any outsiders, and since mana serves as a second heart of swords to the people of this universe, the corruption of mana slowly deteriorates their bodies. But demonic energy also acted in place of their corrupted mana, allowing one's body to keep functioning in the north. In other words, people with corrupted mana were safe as long as they remained in the northern regions, and if they ever left the area, they had to return before it got too late. That's the reason why Aberg eventually had to allow the marriage of the two main characters, but the result she sought wasn't the perfectly happily ever after presented in the novel. She ponders on her mistakes. She was in such a hurry to bring the two characters together that she regarded demonic poisoning as the reason why Aberg allowed the marriage and nothing more, but what she didn't realize was that reading an email, the condition in the novel, was completely different from seeing someone suffer from it before her very eyes. She clenches her fist, noting she has to do something when she suddenly gets an idea. She attempts to take off his helmet, battling the cold while she ponders on how happy she is that she still has memories of her past life, because she happens to know the alchemist, who discovered demonic energy poisoning. Aberg's body was freezing cold, so she tied him to a horse and rode towards the laboratory of Fernando, the alchemist, but she encountered a problem. She soon realized in the middle of her journey she didn't know the exact location of his laboratory. But she managed to possess some information about his laboratory which matched the appearance of the building in front of her. She knocks several times on the door, and when he finally opens up, he orders her to stop pestering him, demanding to know who she is anyway. It is indeed the alchemist, and he retorts, "For your information, I don't read newspapers." Fernando had a deep interest in the northern regions and demonic energy poisoning, so he traveled to the north and eventually succeeded in creating a cure for the condition in the novel. Almost shutting the door, he tells her he's busy with research and asks her to stop bothering him. Pressing her full body weight to stop the door from closing, she explains that she isn't there to sell newspapers, nor is she there to convince him to join a religion either. Instead, she's there to commission a research regarding the northern regions. He asks her what it is she has about the northern region, and she discloses there's an incurable disease in the north, and she was hoping she could commission him to investigate it. He takes a good look at her, observing her appearance very closely, and when he doesn't look too convinced, she begins to panic that the cooperation wouldn't hold. So, she suggests, if he's not convinced, he can take a look under the wraps. He goes to the horse, and the moment he lifts up the wraps, his eyes sparkle with interest as he observes the Duke. "What a perfect sample for my research." He invites her inside, and once he lays the Duke down, he begins his research, first by observing the situation. She calls out to him, constantly trying to get his attention, however his interest is so fixated on the Duke laying there. Fed up, she yells his name, and when she has his attention, in a calm tone she reveals she wishes for him to cure the disease. However, he in response tells her he's not going to be able to. He slowly gets up as he explains he wasn't fully convinced about the existence of this condition until recently, so he hasn't begun working on a cure. He turns to her and then asks if she would be willing to bring the Nan again if he dies to aid his research for the cure, but she cuts him off and suddenly shares she knows all the ingredients necessary to make the cure. First, you need a small ice crystal corrupted by the demonic energy of the north. Then you inject holy water into the crystal, then finally you melt the crystal with fire and let the resulting liquid spread all over the patient's body. She reveals, however, instead of a response she gets an awkward moment of silence between, even more scary. When Fernando finally speaks, he asks if that is it, and she replies that it is. However, she remains unsure of the precise formula, hence the reason why she sought him out. Placing his finger under his chin, he discloses a major problem: most flames can't melt the ice of the north. Unbothered, she simply snaps her finger in flames, but she provides a solution by snapping her fingers, summoning fire around them, and lastly, with a satisfied smile, she assures him he'll have all the flames he could ever want. To her, Fernando could have thought she was suspicious, but instead he was simply grateful to have a live specimen in the form of Aberg, and eventually, he managed to make a sample for the cure. Holding the crystal in her hands, she inquires about whether there will be any possible side effects and then explains that he'd done a simple experiment using candle flames, so although the formula wasn't able to remove the demonic energy, it managed to neutralize some of it, so the formula should improve his condition somewhat. She thanks him and then goes to the side of the Duke and places the crystal so close to him, but the situation quickly gets out of control and the Duke's body ends up engulfed in huge blue flames. Fernando observes, fascinated by the unforeseen situation, while Ginta stands in panic, questioning why the flames aren't decreasing at all. The flame grows worse and she finally drops to the floor in defeat, unable to process what was unfolding before her presence. Unbelievable, Did I just kill the female lead's brother? In her memory, she tried all her best to make everyone happy. In fact, that was in no way the result she ever wanted, killing the female lead's brother. Her panic increases as she begins to question now how she will explain that to Sarin or what will become the fate of the two lovers after the incident. Not only that, the guards will arrest her and put her behind bars, and she will make the headlines as the noble lady who committed murder. Outside her thoughts, the researcher mentions he looks completely fine, so there's no way he's dead. Immediately she turns around to confirm if the statement she heard was true. Then she notices the Duke's cloth didn't even get burned in the flames at all. Also, his chest is rising and falling, which means he's breathing after all, and he looks calm and peaceful too. She breathes a breath of relief while Fernando resumes fawning over his specimen and demonic energy poisoning phenomenon. The flames didn't last long. The huge flame gradually subsided and soon, there was no trace of its smoke, or the dark sheet of scorched ice any longer. Instead, she sits beside the Duke watching him sleep peacefully, unaware of how much she suffered just because of him. She attempts to wake him up, but even after poking his face several times, he doesn't even give her a reaction. So she springs up immediately, ready to leave with satisfaction, only to be held back the minute she turns her back by the man she believed to be soundly asleep. His grip around her hand tightens, then she asks if he's awake, to which he responds by blinking his eyes several times. Then he speaks. He tells her she's warm. She calls him, addressing him as Sir Knight, but he doesn't respond, making her question if perhaps he might be sleep-talking. She leans in closer, gently shaking the Duke and asking if he's all right, but he only stares ahead, looking completely dazed. In the end, she pried the Duke's arm off her hand, finger after finger, after which she wrote a letter before she left the laboratory, so he would feel too shocked after he woke up at an unknown place. In the letter, she explained how he got there and that he was suffering from demonic energy poisoning. She's quite confident Fernando will explain all that's left, but she doesn't have to worry about the Duke for now because she has to go through two things herself. First, she must wait and listen to her parents nagging her. Suddenly a maid pushes the door open and informs them it's an emergency, although this time, it's on the upper floor. Secondly, she must now console her brother, the male lead. She gets to the upper floor and observes the mess her brother has made with her arms folded on her waist as she reflects on the events in the book. The novel is based on a fantasy romance, and that's why there are many elements of fantasy in that universe, an example being the abilities of the main houses. Everyone in her family are born fire mages. The descendants of Valerian can control fire at will. Everyone in the family is born with red eyes and red hair along with the ability to control fire, so people often joke that Valerians come into the world of flame from the womb. Meanwhile, when she finally arrived at her brother's room, she met him sulking about his current situation. He doesn't ignore her presence and in fact asks what she thinks will happen to both he and Sarin. She stands thinking of how he always gets drunk at the first sign of trouble with Sarin and ends up setting everything on fire. She mentions he should stop setting the house on fire or at least remain in one place, noting if he keeps going around the house to get drinks he'll end up burning the entire place down. But rather than being upset after all he's just gotten scolded by his younger sister, he bursts out into laughter. To stop the fire situation from getting out of hand, Ginta suggests he goes to meet Sarin himself if he's so worried about their engagement. You can ask her what will become of your engagement yourself. In response, her brother calmly asks if she can come along with him. Aberg's POV. It's freezing cold. He questions how he turned out that way, if by chance he's dying or maybe that is his punishment for taking so many lives. He thought he could finally be around her again, so why does he have to leave, he questions. Seeing Sarin made me realize how long we had been away, and how sad it was. He recalls one time, Sarin sent him a portrait, along with a letter saying, "It almost feels as though Ginta understands me without having to say anything. She sees right through me and I'm so happy to be her friend." Of course Sarin also brought up the disturbing name of Haint occasionally, but for some reason I felt some warm radiance whenever I saw her name in Sarin's letters, Ginta. And when I finally met her in person, she seemed to recognize me. Normally I should have killed her, but I knew it would make Sarin sad, so I pretended not to notice and made her leave the room instead, but the chill I felt upon leaving the north intensified after she touched me, and after everything I did to ensure Sarin wouldn't be left alone, the last thing I did was make her cry. So, if this is how I die, Sarin will always remember me as someone who hurt her. I wanted Sarin to lead a different life from the one I was forced into. There were so many things I wanted to share and experience with Sarin after our whole time apart, so I desperately struggled to move my body within the abyss. And perhaps the heavens took mercy on my plight because I heard a voice. He sleeps so soundly he doesn't even know how much I suffered for him. I felt her warmth every time her fingers touched me. And I sensed a longing whenever she moved away. Then I realized the warm light was finally walking away from me, so I outstretched my arm to hold her. Finally, the Duke opens his eyes. He rises gently, only to be startled by a voice that inquires about his health now. The strange man with much enthusiasm asks if he's cold or hot, or if perhaps he feels any abnormalities. He asks when he started feeling those abnormalities and how long he's been staying in the north, but the Duke immediately reaches for his throat. He demands, "Where am I? And who the hell are you?" The next day, she returned to Fernando's laboratory first thing in the morning, only to meet him with dark circles around his eye. Fernando gives her some reports on his health. He's so healthy he almost beat him up when he tried to ask how he was feeling, and he also made him craft magic items for him. So with everything relating to the Duke resolved, she decided to turn back and go to the Raffaello Manor with Haint. They arrive at the manor, and as she approaches the gate with her brother she mutters, "This place hasn't changed one bit." The Raffaello Manor was dull to look at because it didn't have many decorations. While most manors had some flower patches in their garden, the Raffaello Manor had nothing but grass. The place always looked the same all year round, as if time had stopped there after Aberg left. She glances back at her brother to check how he's holding up, only to find him slumped downwards. He really wasn't holding up well. She then suggests if he's so anxious maybe they should try discussing outside instead of in the reception room. She suggests they use the glass house, assuring him a place like that will definitely make him feel better and who knows, might even help talk things over. He finally accepts her idea, and with an encouraging grin, she gives him a playful pat on the shoulder, urging him to go for it, leaving him slightly confused. Then she reveals she'll be waiting at the glass house, casually adding that he could talk to her on the way there, also adding it'll be less tense for him. He chuckles, the tension fading from his face, and thanks her before heading off. As for Ginta, she didn't have any trouble getting into the glass house, because she had to go there countless times the previous year to help bring the two lovers together. The glass house was the only colorful place in the entire manor, and it was said that the previous Duke and Duchess Raffaello took good care of it, and that's why it was Sarin's favorite place in the manor. As she hurries toward the glass house, faint noises catch her attention. When she finally turns to look, she spots Duke Raffaello in the middle of training, but something's off. He looks furious. He glares in her direction and she gulps down in fear, sensing the hostility. Her expression quickly changes as she greets him and inquires about how he is, but he gives a sharp response stating, "Not well." She turns around immediately, encouraging him to carry on with what he was indulging in before she interrupts, only for him to call her by her full name. She pauses, and then he disclosed that the alchemist had told him everything. She asks what he's talking about, however she only attracts his stern gaze, and the next time he speaks he just asks if everything the alchemist said is true. He begins walking towards her, sharing he appreciates how kind she's been to his sister, but aside that, he will never forgive her if any of that happened to be a lie. Facing the Duke, who'd openly revealed his identity, she questions if he wasn't trying to hide his identity, or perhaps it could be a test. With a bright smile she continues, "Your sister? I don't know what you're talking about," but the Duke simply asks her to excuse him as he reaches for her hand. She instinctively pulls back at the sudden cold, but the moment the purification flame flickers to life, she yanks her hand away entirely, startled. She tells him that was incredibly rude, while he only smiles, confirming everything the alchemist had told him is true. Immediately she attempts to clear her name, then she explains she wouldn't have anything to do with him if it wasn't for Sarin and asks why she would try to harm him anyway. But the Duke again with the look retorts. You didn't even ask who my sister is, in fact you didn't even think it was odd when a random knight started talking to you. Now her heart pounds faster as she realizes he was indeed testing her all along. The Duke however mentions something unexpected. He reveals he was going to tell her anyway. He explains that he might have to see her as often as seen over the next month, so he figured he might as well tell her about it. His gaze intensifies as he warns. But of course if you ever say this to anyone. Ginta doesn't let him finish and immediately asks why she would tell anyone, stating she's Sarin's friend, not only that her best friend. She tells him she'll make sure she keeps that a secret and discloses, but there's something she doesn't understand, asking why he would have to see her as often as Sarin. He asks if the alchemist hadn't mentioned anything to her and reveals without hesitation that he needs to recharge. He explains that the alchemist has advised that if Hex must stay in the capital, he must recharge an energy that will fly yet the energy of the north in advance. He shows her the crystal, but she just responds that he doesn't need her for that, stating he could light a fire in a furnace so it would be more convenient for him. The Duke quickly explains the alchemist had said the one he made with the flame she left behind didn't react the same way, so the only way he recommended for the condition is to recharge through direct contact. She's startled out of her thoughts by the sound of Sarin's voice calling out in the distance. Hank, confused of his identity, asks who he is, and she introduces him as Sir Nathan, a bodyguard who was sent from the north and will be staying with her for a month. She suggests they all have tea together, and once they're seated together she suggests they exchange their hellos while she goes to get some desserts Sir Nathan would enjoy. Hank is the first to speak. He mentions, "If you're from the north then that must be the first time you've met my Sarin, but you already seem quite close to her, you must be friendlier than you seem." Sir Nathan snaps back, responds stating he tends to be quite sociable unlike someone, while Hank with threatening gaze mentions he found his last phrase to be quite disturbing. But the Duke doesn't let him go and only mentions it wasn't meant to be disturbing. The two of them exchange heated glances at each other, then finally the knight reveals, "Oh, I see, is this because Lady Sarin is being nice to me?" He calls his attitude childish and mentions the Duke would have immediately ruled him out as a potential suitor if he saw him acting that way. Hank asks how he come to know that, stating that isn't his call to make, but Nathan in response mentions he can say he knows the Duke very well. Ginta speaks, but her words are unclear. She mentions maybe she could get Hank to do it. She turns to her brother and explains that she just suddenly remembered a favor someone asked of her. In her mind she carefully thinks, if her brother Hank could be the one to recharge the Duke, it'll help resolve their misunderstanding and take a lot of load off her plate, whilst bringing them together. When Sarin returns with the desserts, she offers different types to the Duke, while Ginta, seated at the table, can only consider how glad she is that they sent the maids out of the glass house, because people would definitely misinterpret the situation. And by that, I'm talking about people like my brother. Thinking to stop the situation from escalating, she decides to intervene. She apologizes to Sarin for storming out earlier, admitting she must have felt so surprised. Sarin admits she did feel startled, but it's fine since she'd at least sent her a letter in the afternoon. Also, she reveals she heard she wasn't feeling too well and concludes she'd broken the news to her when she was already having a hard time, so she can only imagine how shocked she must have felt. Ginta thanks her, however she reveals that's washed the whole truth. As she's about to start explaining, she glances at the Duke, who with a soft mumble warns her not to bring up his situation. She freezes in place from fright, only startling Sarin further. Then she reveals she'd gone after Sir Nathan that day. She explains that she'd gone to him and wanted him against taking her to the north, and also she asked him to deliver her message to the Duke. Sarin appears a little bit relieved, then she continues and mentions the knight was so moved by her devotion to their friendship that he agreed to tell the Duke not to take her to the north. Sarin, glancing at the Duke, softly asks if he had really said that, and she says yes. Ginta glances at the knight, calling his attention for confirmation, and finally, after a strong intimidating gaze, he shares, "I believe I told Lady Ginta I would deliver your message as requested." Lifting his chin, he states in fact he's remembered that's what he said. However, he would also have to tell the Duke whether the lady is doing well there, so he discloses he will have to observe everything for a month. With a hand resting over his chest, he goes on to say that, evidently, he'll be seeing her more often. So let me just say, it's an honor to meet you, Lady Ginta. Though nervous, she introduces herself nonetheless, all while silently wondering what on earth is happening. Are they truly bowing to each other right now? Right after the awkward introduction, they all became very uncomfortable and uneasy. Sarin with a smile assures her brother in a month he'll see how wholesome their relationship is, adding that no one treats her as well as Lord Haint. Ginta, however, notices the shift in her brother's expression, which quickly draws Sarin's attention as well, prompting her to call his name. Meanwhile, Ginta wonders why he's acting like that again, casting a glance in his direction. She grows anxious as she considers he should be glad instead, but why does he look sadder than yesterday now, despite the night across the table giving them a month to prove themselves and how great their love is? Frustrated, she lets out a sigh, wondering if she should just head home. When her brother finally speaks, he asks what was that thing Ginta had said earlier and asks Sarin why she would have to go to the north. He drops the question like a bomb, so unexpectedly freezing Ginta in place as she realizes that was supposed to be her and Sarin's secret, and also, she was too busy checking Aberg's reaction that she didn't even realize her mistake. But her brother continues and asks, if Ginta didn't bring it up as a passing remark earlier, you were never going to tell me, right? At that moment, the only word that escapes Sarin's lips is a quiet "oh," as realization sinks in. He turns his back without a word, preparing to leave when Sarin rises quickly almost immediately, calling after him, her voice laced with urgency as she pleads for them to talk. Sensing the urgency of the moment, Ginta offers to go with her, but Sarin gently declines with a calm no, explaining that she must discuss it with him herself before hurrying away. Left alone with the Duke, she drops back to her seat and quietly ponders on whether to leave. Finally, she makes her decision and playfully explains she has something to do, so she'll get going. However, before she can escape the Duke, he slams his teacup fiercely against the table, startling her back to seat. He then disclosed something she mentioned earlier disturbed him. She panics as she questions silently if he's going to bring up his situation, only for the Duke to mention that she'd said something earlier about making Lord Haint do something for her. Then he asks, almost cautiously, hoping she hadn't been referring to the recharge. Staring in confusion, she asks whatever he means by that question, but the Duke, moving on, warns, if that's what she had in mind, he'd just say in advance, she better not task her brother with it. With an irritated expression, he explains he doesn't like that man, and even the thought of him touching him gives him goosebumps. He tells her he doesn't enjoy exposing weak spots people could later exploit and asks if she understands, but then she gets a hint. She tells him she understands it must be very uncomfortable for him since she's Haint Valerian's sister. Then she suggests she could hire a fire mage for him, but he fiercely refuses. Then he explains that he was to meet up with someone regularly, eventually they would begin questioning his identity, and unless they're complete fools, he wouldn't trust anyone who can be bought with money. To avoid the situation escalating, she nods in agreement with his statement as she states, that's true, the more people who know about the secret the better. Then she assured him, for the month to follow he can count on her to take really good care of him. But is this even in the plot of the story? The Duke, adjusting his cape, responds, you will take care of me, huh? I look forward to it, Lady Ginta, with a smile. In a new scene, the maids in house for Phalo grow anxious as they question if they can really begin the preparations, thinking it'll be better to start early than not to be prepared when the lady comes asking. Ginta steps in at this point and manages to overhear them speaking about the banquet ceremony. They all turn to greet her, and when she asks what their discussion was about, a maid explains that the imperial princess had invited Lady Sarin for her birthday banquet, so they're trying their best to make sure their lady will be gorgeous at the ceremony. Ginta shares without hesitation she had no idea such a banquet was going to hold, and the maid suggests maybe she'd forgotten to check the invitation. Also, she explains that it's going to be the last birthday the princess will celebrate as a minor, so she heard all the nobles were sent an invitation for the special banquet. Ginta then realized it's possible, as the maid suggested that she forgot to check her invitations since the moment she began matchmaking for the lovers she never answered any banquets or tea invitations. She would either say she isn't interested or threaten to drink tea while laying down, which could be quite dangerous, so her family and Daisy gave up trying to make her attend social events altogether. She thanks the maid for the useful piece of information and immediately hurries to leave. Later, she sits on her bed and silently reflects on how she had to go through her entire room to find it. Now she sits on her bed holding the invitation in her hand, from Deborah, Princess Basto. She is the imperial princess of the Bastia Empire and its sole direct heir, who constantly harassed Sarin out of her hatred for Aberg as the villainess of the story. But what had prompted the imperial princess to harm Sarin, she ponders. It all began with the unexpected death of the Duke and Duchess Raffaello. The Empress took their deaths as the perfect opportunity to bring the mighty House Raffaello under his thumb, so he began by trying to make the young Aberg marry his daughter. However, Aberg turned the offer down every time for 4 years, and when Aberg finally turned 19, the Duke gave him 2 choices. To either be with the princess, which meant marrying her, or to be sent to the northern regions. If Aberg were to marry the Princess, Sarin would have to succeed him as Duchess, and he knew all that too well, and that it'll force Sarin to be exposed to the dirty deeds of high society at a young age, so he chose to be sent to the north without a second of hesitation. But repeatedly getting turned down by a man she never had a heart for, could only make Princess Deborah feel. The next morning, as her maid slides the curtain aside and the soft rays of light shine on her, she mumbles sleepily before sitting up on her bed, yawning as she greets her maid, who responds by noting that the room seems more scattered than usual. Daisy then asks if she was able to find what she was searching for, and she nods, explaining that she had been looking for an invitation letter so she would be able to attend the imperial banquet, which is now just 4 days away. Her maid gasps in shock, but she pays her no mind, already fretting aloud that the boutique must be sold out of dresses by now, leaving her no choice but to alter one of the gowns she already owns. But just as she finishes, her maid's voice cracks in protest, insisting that doing so would be no different from dragging her reputation through filth. Without giving her a chance to argue, the maid urges her to get ready at once so they can head out immediately. Before leaving, she gives a quick command to one of the maids in the corner to clean her room, and in the blink of an eye, she finds herself standing in front of the grand gates of the Raffaello manor. Her maid explains that she had mentioned Lady Sarin would also be attending the banquet, and since they share a similar build, it would be wise to ask if they could borrow one of the many dresses the lady must have already prepared. Without waiting for hesitation, the maid pulls her toward the gate, confidently assuring her that Lady Sarin would be more than happy to lend a hand. Once inside, they're welcomed by one of the manor's maids, who politely informs them that her mistress is currently in the dressing room trying on her outfits. She steps into the dressing room and is immediately struck by the sight of dresses piled high, scattered across every surface as if a storm of silk and lace had blown through the space. From the sheer number alone, she assumes Sarin must have been trying them on for hours, no doubt exhausted from sorting through so many options in search of the perfect one. But just as she turns her head, ready to call out to Sarin, she freezes. Standing before her isn't the lady of the manor, but the Duke himself. Caught off guard, she stiffens, her thoughts racing as she struggles to understand why the Duke, a supposed knight, no less, would be in the lady of the manor's dressing room. Uncomfortable and hoping his business there is already concluded, she musters the courage to speak, suggesting he might be running an errand. But without hesitation, he replies that he isn't, and calmly adds that Lady Sarin had asked him to stay. Sarin's maid quickly informs her of Ginta's presence, and the next moment, the curtain is carefully pulled aside. Sarin steps out gracefully in a striking blue dress as she shares she's glad she's there now and mentions she's already decided on that dress but still can't make up her mind about jewelry. She walks over to her and continues, explaining that everyone got so caught up in the decision that they started having divided opinions. With a warm gaze, she pleads with Ginta to help her choose a piece of jewelry, adding that she knows she has a good eye for things like that. Ginta without hesitation agrees to help her with her problem and immediately gets to doing so. Once she turns away, Sarin turns to the knight and asks if she could ask him to help her pick out one too. Gazing at her softly, he asks if that'll be all right and she says yes, stating she's sure they'll have better results if more people contribute to it. He agrees, and just as he reaches for a piece of jewelry, commenting that it would pair well with the dress, Ginta, who doesn't seem to notice the Duke, appears and chimes in, saying she chooses that one too. Just as she processes the situation, a wave of cold rushes through her, leaving her frozen in place. Still, she manages to take note of one thing: at the very least, he seems noticeably less cold than he was before. But her surprise soon shifts to panic when she realizes he isn't letting go of her hand. She glances at the Duke, catching the look in his empty gray eyes just as he quietly mutters, "I knew it." Though his voice is too low for anyone else to hear, she reads his lips clearly as he adds that he doesn't want to let go. She pauses, trying to steady her thoughts. She understands, he's only saying that because he needs the warmth for his condition. But with the way his expression looks, and with their hands still linked like this, it's impossible not to overthink it. No, she tells herself, forget how I feel. The real problem is people will definitely misunderstand this situation, and the look on Sarin's face confirms it. Snapping into action, she quickly shifts the mood. She comments that since Sir Nathan also likes the necklace, that must make it the perfect choice. Then, turning to the knight, she tells him he should do the honors and asks him to hand the necklace to Sarin. He places the necklace gently around Sarin's neck, and the maids immediately gather around, admiring the final look and agreeing that two heads are certainly better than one. Meanwhile, Ginta stands off to the side, catching her breath in silence. Seeing the perfect opportunity, she decides to use the distraction to quietly slip away from the Duke. But just as she begins to move, her steps come to a sudden halt when a familiar voice calls out to Lady Sarin. She turns to find Daisy on the verge of tears, pleading with the lady to help her scold her. She discloses her intention to modify one of her old dresses to wear to the imperial banquet. "I feel so upset," she declares. Sarin turns to her and admits she hadn't asked for her earlier because she assumed she wouldn't be attending the banquet, adding that they could have prepared together if she had known. But before Ginta can respond, the scene shifts around her. She watches as Daisy leans in to whisper something into Lady Sarin's ear, and soon, the surrounding maids begin to join in on the quiet conversation, leaving her completely confused about what's going on. Then, in the very next moment, their eyes light up with excitement, and a maid rushes out with a dress in hand. "You're absolutely right, and thanks for the reminder." Sarin asks her what she thinks about the dress, explaining that it doesn't suit her because it looks too fancy, but she thinks it would look great on her instead. She asks Daisy if she agrees with her, then turns to Sir Nathan to hear his thoughts on the dress, and while he stares at her, she thinks to herself that he only cares about his sister and wouldn't possibly have an opinion about her, but to her surprise, he takes the dress in his hands, admitting that he can't really picture it that way. He steps closer, holding the dress up and aligning it with her body as if sizing it against her frame, then presses it lightly onto her shoulders, and when she instinctively steps back, he moves forward again, asking her what's wrong. With a hesitant smile, she replies that she just thought the dress didn't suit him, judging by his reaction. He gazes at her while she nervously fidgets under his stare, and then he leans in slightly as he speaks, his voice low. "In the month to follow, we'll have to get even closer than this, and much more intimate too, so why are you already running from me?" Her cheeks flush red, and in the next moment, his expression shifts as he raises his voice slightly to ask her if she doesn't think so too. After that, Aberg only made one remark, "It could be better," then he shifted his focus back to Sarin. As much as she wanted to return home, Sarin insisted she try on other dresses as well. She grabbed her, then left her behind the curtains and made her try on all kinds of dresses and shoes. Behind the curtains, Sarin asked about how Lord Haint was after he returned home the previous day, and she responds and shares he was delighted and kept on smiling. A smile spreads across Sarin's face as Ginta reveals he hadn't really said much, though it seemed the two of them managed to really work it out. But Duke Raffaello did surprise her, by making random remarks once in a while, like complimenting the dress on her body. It took several hours until she could finally escape from Sarin's dress-up game. Daisy informs her that she'll go get the carriage ready and suggests she take her time with the Duke, to which Ginta simply thanks her. Once Daisy steps out, the Duke immediately reaches for the box in her hand and snatches it from her, offering to assist. Then he casually asks if her brother is always that fickle, pointing out how furious he was the other day only to now act completely fine, and as it hits her, she asks if he was eavesdropping on them earlier, to which he admits he didn't mean to but couldn't help overhearing. Clutching the box in his hand, he confesses that Sarin had always been so frail and soft-spoken since childhood, so he hoped her partner would be someone strong, with clear leadership, and as he says this, his eyes drift toward Ginta. The air between them grows tense as she silently thinks, "Oh, aren't you a jerk?" Sure, her brother may be as passive as a plant who needs her to take care of everything, but no one else gets to talk down on him like that except her. Without hesitation, she counters his remark, explaining that people like that tend to be too set in their own ways and often ignore their partner's voice, adding that someone like that would be difficult for Sarin to be with because she's weak and prudent. However, the Duke again retorts that it'll be equally troublesome if both partners are too prudent all the time. Ginta doesn't back down either and states that they're only trying to be careful because they like each other. Then the Duke begins. He mentions Sarin has always been a good listener, commending it as an incredibly lovely trait for one to possess. Then he casually mentions that Sarin has had lines of suitors ever since her debutante ball, and in a flash, she jumps to defend her brother, insisting he isn't so bad himself, even calling him the most handsome, though she suddenly pauses midway through the word, her hand frozen midair and trembling. Composing herself, she calmly finishes her sentence, declaring that her brother is the most handsome man in the Empire, while in her mind, she's in disbelief that she actually just complimented Haint. At that moment, Daisy calls out to her, announcing that the carriage is ready and it's time to leave. Without missing a beat, she snatches the box from the Duke's hand and bolts for the stairs, mumbling to herself, "Sure, let's go before this gets ugly." But just as she's about to hop into the carriage, the Duke suddenly grabs her mid-step, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder as he says, "Lady Ginta, let's be honest, I'm more handsome than your brother, but on the other hand, Sarin is the most beautiful lady in the Empire, bar none." She stares at him helplessly, wondering if that was seriously what he held her back just to say, thinking he might have had something more important in mind. Then a smile spreads across his face as he gives her a gentle pat on the shoulder and tells her goodbye. As she watches him walk away, she thinks to herself, "I must be out of my mind or something. He always seems so cold and ruthless, but when it comes to his sister, he's surprisingly soft. That's actually kind of cute." Just then, the Duke suddenly stops in his tracks, turns slightly, and adds, "I meant what I said earlier, the red dress with red roses sewn across it, it really does look great on you, Lady Ginta." His words linger in her mind, washing over memories of him adjusting the dress against her shoulders, his gaze, his closeness, and before she realizes it, her cheeks go red as she stands frozen in place. But the Duke's voice calls her back again. He tells her he left the capital right after coming of age, so while he can't say he's been to many banquets, he can say he's never seen a lady more stunning than her in that dress, also adding that he's sure she'll turn every head at the banquet. Her voice cracks slightly as she thanks him, stealing a glance at his unusually sullen expression. But just as she panics, thinking he caught her staring, he dryly remarks, "Of course, Sarin will still be prettier than everyone else." She slumps with a sigh, replying that she's heard him loud and clear and will keep that in mind. This time, there are no interruptions as she finally steps into the carriage, and as it pulls away from the manor, Daisy glances back at the knight and teases, "Maybe that knight likes you, my lady," but Ginta immediately dismisses it as nonsense. Daisy raises a brow and notes how he seems unusually close to her, and she suggests maybe he's just being nice because she is Sarin's best friend. Ginta then explains how the Duke Raffaello sent the knight from the north and suggests he might just be getting familiar with everyone close to Sarin under the Duke's orders, especially since she happens to be Lord Hain's sister. Daisy's expression turns thoughtful as she mutters that she hadn't realized there was more to that knight than she thought, advising herself to watch her actions around him. Back at the manor, after the carriage disappears into the distance, the Duke turns back and pauses when he sees Sarin. She asks if he's sure he wasn't arguing with her, and he responds calmly saying no, instead he was only following her instructions by helping with the luggage. He bows slightly and apologizes if he caused any misunderstanding, and Sarin waves it off and admits she might have gotten the wrong idea watching from the window. From her view, it had seemed like he was intimidating Ginta, and that she'd run away frightened. She apologizes again, but he gently tells her not to and states in fact, she's partly right. He adds that the Duke always worried about how easily she trusts people and often said he regretted not teaching her how to better discern others before leaving. His thoughts drift to Ginta's words, how she asked why she would discuss his secrets since she's Sarin's friend, not just any friend, her best friend. He closes his eyes briefly and mutters that, from his perspective, the Duke has nothing to worry about. Sarin brightens at his words and happily replies that that's exactly why she chose Lord Haint, but the Duke turns his back and remarks that he's still not entirely convinced about that part. Her excitement vanishes on the spot as her maid calls her back, reminding her that everyone's still waiting in the dressing room. As she's gently pulled away, the Duke turns to the window, staring out as he repeats to himself, "She ran away frightened, huh?" He reflects silently. It didn't feel good watching her carriage speed off like that, as if she were desperate to avoid him. He'd even complimented her, something he'd never done just to win someone's favor, and yet, it felt like her ruby-red eyes were always searching for an escape, and every word she said came with a quiet sigh of disbelief. Just the memory of that makes him feel a surge of unfamiliar emotions. It felt unpleasant, although it didn't make him angry. In fact, it only made him think of how he should ensnare her next time. He thinks to himself, I didn't want to be as ruthless as we are in the north, though the nature of the hunt was bound to leave a scar or two on the prey, but if I didn't know how that felt, I would have never obsessed over it. But now, I wish I could get closer, and hold her for a little while longer. The banquet approaches quickly and, before anyone realizes it, 3 days have passed, and the day of the banquet finally arrives. Standing before their parents, Ginta listens quietly as their mother gives her a sharp warning, reminding her not to stay out without permission again, or she'd be furious. Their father then turns to Haint, his tone firm and measured, advising him to be especially careful at the banquet, reminding him of his position as the head of House Valerian. He brings up the engagement, stating he hadn't made an official announcement because Haint asked him not to, but now, he presses, surely Haint doesn't intend to break it off. Haint's fist clenches slightly, but with a calm voice, he assures him that won't happen. Their father nods and remarks that it's good, but urges him to leave a good impression tonight, warning that while he may be his father, he won't hesitate to act as the head of the house if Haint becomes the center of yet another scandal. With that, their parents leave first, and Ginta informs them she and Haint will make a quick stop at the Raffaello manor to pick up Sarin. Though their father's words seemed harsh, he had good reason. Haint had once again drawn the eyes of the entire empire to their family, for the wrong reasons. The engagement ceremony had ended without incident, but the press still sensationalized it. Lady Sarin Raffaello disappears during her engagement ceremony and reappears at the end with a swollen face. What happened? That headline spread like wildfire. Leaning her head against the carriage window, Ginta sighs. The article likely made everyone believe the Valerians were the worst in-laws imaginable. They eventually arrive at the Raffaello estate, and Ginta tells Haint to go on ahead and fetch his partner while she waits in the carriage. After some time passes, the carriage door finally opens, but it isn't Haint and it isn't Sarin who appears. "It would be nice if you could hurry and take it out of my pocket," the voice requested. That's right, it wasn't Haint and Sarin who came to the carriage. It was Duke Raffaello in his weakened state. She waits alone in the carriage, growing impatient as minutes tick by with no sign of her brother or Sarin. Her mind drifts to possible reasons. Maybe they're whispering sweet nonsense to each other, or worse, he's clashing again with the Duke. In a bid to calm herself, she opens the window for some air, only to be greeted by a gust of wind strong enough to nearly destroy her carefully styled hair. Panic sets in as she realized refixing it would take hours, but before she can fully process the disaster, a knock on the carriage door cuts through her thoughts. Peering out, she's surprised to see the Duke. He enters after receiving her permission, and one look at his pale face and frosty breath tells her something is wrong. She asks if he's feeling unwell again, and he admits he's at his limit. When asked about the alchemist, she replies she hasn't visited him as she got too busy preparing for the banquet. But she reveals the alchemist did share with her that he requires more information for his experiments, so she was planning to revisit him after the banquet. His steps weaken and he staggers. Sending something's wrong, she urgently suggests they send someone to the alchemist, but his answer is unexpected. He mentions something about his inner pocket. Confused, she asks why he didn't just take it out, but he says he was hoping she would, and that's how she ends up awkwardly removing the Duke's jacket in the back of a carriage. He calls her name, and the next thing she knows, he pulls her hand and she lands weakly in his lap. When she tries to sit back up, he stops her, saying there's no point, she'd need to hold him afterward anyway. Left with no other choice, she reaches for the inner pocket of the Duke, rummaging through it whole, maintaining closeness to the Duke, enough that she can feel his breath. Once she gets the crystal out, he slips off his glove while she places the crystal into his palm. Blue flames flare up once again. He asks if she's hurt, but she assures him she's fine, just startled by how cold he feels, which can't be helped since their temperature difference is stark. Curious, she asks if he's hurt, but he says the same thing. He tells her she's so warm, so much so that he finds her warmth comforting, something he doesn't want to let go of. Before she can even suggest sending the coachman to fetch the others, familiar footsteps approach outside. Sarin, unaware of the tension inside the carriage, is explaining to Haint that the knight is like a brother to her and hopes he'll get along with him. Inside, the Duke swiftly lifts her and places her on the opposite seat. With a finger pressed to his lips, he signals for secrecy, a gesture she mirrors in response, and he responds with a soft smile before opening the carriage door, right into Haint. He explains he only tried to open the door because he heard Sarin's voice, claiming he hadn't realized he was also there, since he's hardly noticeable. Just as Haint is about to fire back, Sarin steps in and diffuses the tension. The knight tries to step out of the carriage in an attempt to go get his horse, however Sarin stops him in his tracks and insists they all go to the banquet together, urging everyone to get along. The knight prepares to ride his horse instead, but Sarin stops him, insisting he join them in the carriage. And so they all ride together, crammed into the same space. The Duke and Haint both stare silently out their respective windows, building thick tension in the carriage air. Making the trip to the palace was almost unbearable, but even more so, what was more unbearable was the fact that the innocent Sarin, my POV, thought it was a good idea to step into the banquet hall after rumors of her engagement being broken the same day, hand in hand with another man other than her fiancé. Like Sarin PMO so bad guys, she might as well date her brother at this point. Luckily, Sir Nathan intervenes and points out that if she were to enter with another man, it'll spark scandal, as they should, and the fact that she isn't considering Lord Hain in any of this is wild, so he'll just go in with Lady Ginta instead. Extending his hand to Ginta, he asks if she'll accompany him for Sarin's sake, and she agrees. She didn't have a partner, so the Duke decided to join her. The imperial palace was as grand and glorious as its namesake. However, what she didn't expect was that the gladness she'd felt to be out of that suffocating carriage would be replaced by a feeling even more disturbing. The nobles, upon noticing their arrival, began to exchange whispers amongst themselves, bringing up the rumors, how they argued in their engagement ceremony, how Sarin was moved to tears already so early because she knew how hard the in-laws will be on her. How the Marquis' son has the upper hand in the relationship even though she's the Duke's sister, since their family isn't as influential as it used to be while their parents were still alive. Her thoughts wander off. Maybe they'd be better off splitting up, to reduce attention. Then, she notices Lord Haint taking initiative. He asked Sarin for the first dance. She accepted with a graceful nod, and his eyes flicked to the knight's direction as a smug sneer spread across his face in victory. Fearing the situation might escalate as the Duke looks visibly provoked by his childish action, Ginta softly mumbles, "Wait." He turns around and she immediately grabs him, this time her voice louder than the last time as she declared, "I said wait." The Duke turns to her asking what it is, and she reminds him she's his partner and asks that he's sure not going to leave her alone. A single teardrop settles in the corner of her eye as she explains, because if he does they'll only speak of how she lost her partner to her friend, and that's what will be written about for tomorrow's headlines. Even then his attention lingered on Sarin and Haint, and when he finally looked back, she added that it wouldn't just stop there. They'll spread all kinds of rumors about how Sarin cheated, but he insists he's only going to be gone for a moment, asking in confusion as to why they would speak like that. In response, she tells him he has no idea how fast rumors can spread at a banquet. He finally acknowledges her point with a silent mutter, "I see," and then the next moment, he pulls her hand and then states, "Then I will try my best not to start any rumors since I'm here as your partner." As they dance out of concern, she asks if he doesn't think that would attract too much attention, but he counters her concerns, stating it will be equally as bad if she doesn't dance with her partner. Then he reveals, he hopes she isn't trying to make him the man who got turned down by his partner, and she immediately responds denying that. Then as he brushes his hand around her waist, he asks, "Then, please come closer to me." After his comment, her gaze softens, and her expression shifts to that of worry as her mind is filled with curiosity of what he could be hiding behind those empty and indifferent gray eyes of his. Her thoughts spiral. She admits it's quite clear from the way he shows his selfless and unconditional affection for his sister. He does have feelings, like everybody else, it's just that all his feelings are focused on one person, and he probably has to repress them because they could be used against him. Her gaze lingers longer than she intended, prompting the Duke to ask why she's looking at him that way. When she acts confused, he dryly remarks that she's staring at him like he's a sad little puppy. Quickly shooting down the confusion, she clarifies, "No, you're not as cute as a puppy at all, Sir Nathan." Suddenly, an official announcement interrupts them. All guests are to rise before the king. Knights raise their swords, and mages ignite the sky with dazzling fireworks. Then she appears. The tyrant-to-be, the villainess from the novel, Princess Deborah. The novel described her as a tyrant-to-be, and it was said that she constantly made deadly threats to people around her. In fact, she was such a tyrant that the sequel of the novel briefly mentioned how she was beheaded with a guillotine by the rebel forces, 10 years later. But aside from her villainy, she was an ideal heir to the throne, for she inherited the special ability of the imperial family. It was said that the first emperor had the ability to control human will, but the power gradually dwindled through the generations. And in recent times, Deborah was the only person of the imperial lineage to be born with the power for several decades. Furthermore, Deborah was the daughter of the late empress. That was what she was born into, and by taking her place right below the emperor's throne, she imprinted her status and position in the minds of everyone present. But despite her dominance, the story had one person capable of toppling her, her half-brother, Prince Libios. Known as Prince Basto, he lacked her bloodline gifts or claim to legitimacy, but everyone praised his noble character, and the fact that there existed someone to make a comparison could only highlight Deborah's villainy more. The emperor finally delivers his speech, expressing his joy at seeing so many gathered for his beloved daughter's coming-of-age ceremony. He closes with warm wishes, hoping everyone enjoys the celebration he's prepared. As the floor opens up, the nobles all flock toward Princess Deborah, eager to curry favor. Yet few approach Prince Libios, afraid that doing so might provoke the princess's wrath. Meanwhile, Sarin watches the princess with wide-eyed admiration, eager but anxious. She's never been directly invited by Deborah, so she assumes this must be her subtle way of seeking reconciliation. But beneath that hopeful excitement, a cruel humiliation awaits. She whispers to Ginta, suggesting they should also greet the princess, which Ginta agrees to but advises they wait until the crowd thins. For now, she suggests, diverting Sarin's attention to the Duke and Lord Haint, who are arguing in the corner again. Sarin immediately rushes off to scold him while Ginta stands, watching satisfied with a smug look on her face. But just as she turns her attention back, a voice calls Sarin's name. She turns to find a young man, Prince Libios. He greets her warmly, saying he spotted her from across the room and could hardly believe she'd come. He recounts how they used to cross paths at banquets before the Duke was stationed in the north. Then the murmurs begin again, eyes shift toward them, and whispers stir through the banquet hall as he goes on, pointing out how it's been 4 years since they last met, and how he'd even read about her engagement in the newspaper. With a snicker, Prince Libios casts a glance at Haint, casually remarking that the Marquis's eldest son must be her partner. Extending a hand for a handshake, he shares that he's heard much about him, particularly his commendable work in the disaster-struck regions of the Empire. He adds that Haint seems just as capable as the Marquis himself. In response, Haint humbly replies that the prince flatters him, but he still has a long way to go to match his father's legacy. The prince then turns to Ginta, and she introduces herself with polite grace. His attention soon shifts to the man beside her, the knight. He taps his chest in greeting and, with a bow, introduces himself as Nathan Digov. But the prince doesn't reply. Instead, he just stares at Nathan, so long and so hard that the silence becomes suspicious. To divert his attention, Ginta steps in smoothly, informing the prince that Sir Nathan is her companion for the evening. With a sigh and a forced smile, she explains that Nathan hails from a remote region up north, so he's been gawking at every little detail in awe. Playing her part as a typical noble lady angling for attention, she adds that no other banquet could possibly compare to the ones hosted at the Imperial Palace. The prince hums thoughtfully, then mentions, "So, he was your partner? That's a shame." With a casual shrug, he admits he attended alone tonight, hoping to find someone new to accompany him. If not for the night, he says, he might have asked her instead. Matching his energy, Ginta replies it's a pity. If only she had known, perhaps she would have come alone. He leans in slightly, asking if he could still make the request, but just then, Nathan firmly grabs her hand and calls her name. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" Prince Libios lets out a hesitant laugh, glancing between them before joking that the knight must have feelings for her. He assures Nathan, though, that he isn't about to steal anyone's partner. With a calm but unwavering expression, Nathan replies, "I'm so relieved to hear that." Libios walks off, taking a crowd of nobles with him. Once he's gone, Sarin gasps and raises her hand to her mouth, pointing out, they're still holding hands. Ginta quickly pulls away, asking if she can have her hand back while the Duke apologizes. She laughs lightly, brushing it off, saying she's sure he didn't mean it, adding he's not the type to do something like that without a reason. The Duke murmurs, almost to himself, "A reason, you say," then adds, "If you really want one, I'll try to come up with something." He goes on to explain that it seemed like Libios would never stop talking unless interrupted, so he had to step in. With a bow, he apologizes if it made her uncomfortable, but she reassures him that it's fine. An awkward silence follows, stretching too long to bear. Sarin finally decides to excuse herself, claiming she needs the bathroom. But just as she turns, the Duke's arm reaches out and pulls her close, steadying her. He tells her gently to be careful, stating she almost tripped on her dress, but in her head, she scoffs, "Liar," as she barely moved. Her head nearly rests against his chest when he lowers his voice and whispers, asking if he can ask her something. Then she says yes. He leans into her ear and asks with a whisper, "Were you actually going to go with him?" She looks confused, and he starts to clarify, "When Prince Libios." But before he can finish, a voice cuts through the crowd. "Lady Sarin." It's Princess Deborah, and, of course, with the usual crowd of nobles behind her. Her bird chirps sharply, and her tiger lets out a low growl, startling Sarin, but Deborah merely pets the beast, silencing it with ease. With her fan raised to her lips, she smirks and says she hadn't expected to see her there. Sarin, gathering herself, bows politely and thanks her for the invitation, but Deborah only scoffs in reply, admitting that while she did order her servants to send invitations to every noble, she hadn't expected she would get an invitation also. She continues with a condescending grin, "Even if she did receive an invitation, it's still impressively thick-skinned of her to have actually attended." Across the hall, the Duke clenches his trembling fists, clearly rattled by the princess's words, but Ginta quickly steps in front of him, blocking him before he does anything rash. She looks at the Duke and considers. He seems utterly shocked, as if he never anticipated this reception. Then again, it's somewhat understandable. Just how Aberg only wrote to Sarin about his well-being, Sarin never wrote about any hardships or troubles either whenever she wrote to Aberg. She lets out a soft groan of discomfort as she thinks that was incredibly mean of the princess, but things would only get worse if the Duke was to interfere, and that's because... Then Deborah suddenly mentions she heard Sarin annulled her engagement with Lord Haint and yet she attended with him as her partner. Does that mean you're having second thoughts? Haint steps in immediately, denying the claim. Their engagement was never annulled. But the princess raises her voice sharply. I don't recall asking you to speak, Lord Haint. Turning her attention back to Sarin, she sneers, you're no different from your brother. I remember seeing the Duke from afar when I was a child. He seemed thick-skinned too. As the princess savors her insult, Sarin's fists tremble, her voice breaks as she finally responds. Your Highness. The princess, continuing with her biting arrogance, brings up how the Duke rudely rejected the many kind sentiments extended to him by His Imperial Majesty. With a tilt of her head, she mentions she's even heard rumors that people call him the Monster Duke, and with a scoff remarks that she guesses he hasn't changed at all. She continues stating she can't believe that is the only thing anyone's heard of him since he was sent to the north, and then sneers. How typical of him, and with a scoff, adds that she supposes nothing has changed at all. Sarin tries to interrupt, but the princess pushes forward, insisting that she's certain the Duke must have been tormenting his servants and those around him with his obstinate and unyielding nature. Ginta, on the other hand, only notices Sarin trying to hold back. Angering the members of the imperial family would defeat the whole purpose of attending the banquet. In fact, the imperial family barely had to lift a finger to further banish Aberg for the rest of his life. That's how vulnerable House Raffaello was in the absence of the Duke. Still, a small grin tugs at the corner of Ginta's lips. Because despite all that, she knew Sarin wasn't going to let herself be trampled upon. At last, the princess pauses, realizing Sarin had been calling out to her. She narrows her eyes and says with feigned politeness, you keep calling me, very well, speak. Sarin, without hesitation, begins calmly. She says she understands how the princess might feel. After all, as a woman herself, she could imagine how much she must resent her brother, the Duke. She mentions after all, he turned down Her Highness's proposal several times. But, gently, she asks her not to take it personally, sharing it's not because the princess isn't beautiful or desirable, but simply because she's not the kind of woman the Duke is searching for, in hopes that this new clarification might ease her anger toward him. Then, lowering her voice with a soft chuckle, Sarin steps closer. She politely asks if the princess would mind a question. Leaning in, she whispers, did you eat dessert earlier? Her voice rises slightly as she adds it's just that there's something stuck in her teeth. With a gentle tap under her own chin, she kindly suggests the princess do something about it before anyone else notices. Stepping back, Sarin says she supposes seeing her face must be unpleasant for the princess too, since she so closely resembles the Duke, and since this is Her Highness's banquet, Sarin wouldn't want to ruin her day. With a polite bow, she announces she won't stay much longer and takes her leave. Left behind in the hall, the princess trembles with suppressed rage, her jaw tight as her pride burns. Meanwhile, Ginta looks toward the Duke, unable to hide her smug grin. See? I told you, just sit back and enjoy the show. But the Duke isn't paying her any attention. She noticed he's been staring at the door ever since Sarin left. His mind isn't even in the banquet ceremony anymore. She could see mixed feelings flash over the Duke's eyes. He looked like he could rip and tear someone apart. He felt rage towards the princess while he harbored guilt and sympathy for his sister. It wasn't any hard to see the things he felt about Sarin on his face, and above all it was quite understandable why he reacted that way, but for some reason it makes her upset. She lets out a sigh and then gently taps his shoulder. With a smile she shares, you should go with her, don't mind me. She ponders on her feelings. She also felt troubled to see Sarin being treated that way, but it felt weird to see the Duke only worry about her feelings. It almost felt like he had completely forgotten about her existence there, so the only thing she could do was to let him go. After her sentence she made sure she didn't turn around to look back. Also, there was a reason she didn't leave with Sarin and Haint. Instead, she was going to console Deborah because she knew she'd be hiding somewhere to cry. It might not seem like much right now, but it would eventually serve as a big turning point in its own ways. At first, Deborah only wanted to bully Sarin out of her grudge against Abert, but she starts despising Sarin after she gets humiliated today. And if that were to continue, she would find herself caught between their hatred and might even be killed someday. When she finally arrives at the balcony, she pleads for forgiveness for Sarin, thinking she isn't trying to betray her, but someone must leave a good impression in other to reduce the damage. Then the princess asks how she knew she was there, stating she knows she's a friend to Sarin, and asks if she's there to mock her also. Speaking from the look of things, Ginta made the right call. She calmly replies that she's not there for that. She simply wanted somewhere quiet to rest, but the banquet hall was full, with the quiet places already occupied by the noble ladies. As she sits on the floor, she continues her story, how she ended up wandering to the terrace and then here, but then the princess suddenly demands to know what she's doing. She explains that the pavilion is for resting, and her feet hurt. Your Highness, she suggests, why not take your shoes off too? I'm sure yours hurt as well. She lifts her heels and asks the princess what she thinks. Pointing out that they're alone anyway, Ginta adds that no one would judge, but the princess just scoffs and says one would have to be shameless to do that. Ginta thanks her for the compliment, and the princess, confused, clarifies that it was a compliment, but she explains she thinks it is a compliment. She explains that to be shameless, it means she doesn't care about what people think of her, and it also means she isn't afraid of mistakes or failures, that she's strong enough to soldier on, and besides all that she shares with a bright smile. The literal meaning of the word simony means I'm not ashamed of anything. How does that sound? Don't you think it's a wonderful thing? And the princess, starting under low tone, mumbles, Lady Ginta, you really are shameless. Ginta laughs, and when the princess asks what's so funny, she admits she had left the banquet hall feeling frustrated, but now, she feels lighter. She even made her laugh. With a soft smile, she adds that maybe this is what it feels like to have a little sister, adding that she wouldn't know how it feels since she only had an older brother. She quickly freezes, realizing she may have overstepped. In a panic, she bows and apologizes if anything she said was inappropriate, but the princess quietly assures her it's all right. Holding her tiger close, she murmurs, no one ever treats me like this, but it's fine. The princess thanks her, and for a moment, silence settles between them. Soon, the princess stands and announces that she should return to the hall. Surely everyone is waiting. But before she walks off, she pauses and turns back, Ginta's voice rising as she calls out to the princess. She tells her not to worry about anyone else today, encouraging her to be shameless if she must. After all, this day belongs to her and it will never come again. She deserves to enjoy it completely. With a smile, she reminds the princess that today marks her entry into adulthood. It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment, and she should celebrate it fully. Then she softly wishes her a happy birthday. Later that night, Ginta returns home, collapsing tiredly onto her bed. She considers changing her clothes, but she knows Daisy will probably make her bathe anyway, muttering to herself that she's too lazy to do it. Her thoughts drift back to the banquet. She wonders if Deborah had managed to enjoy herself, recalling how she left before the night ended and as a result didn't get to witness what followed. Still, she's confident things went well. In the original story, Deborah had always regretted running away from the banquet. But she's sure the princess did something to change that. Suddenly, soft tapping sounds draw her attention. At first, they're faint, but they grow more rhythmic. She rises, puzzled. It couldn't be an animal, not with how steady the knocks are, and also, she's on the ground floor, so that rules out anything random. A chill passes through her, maybe a ghost? She quickly grabs a candlestick, ready to defend herself with fire if necessary. After a tense moment, she opens her eyes, and stares in shock. Standing on her balcony is Duke Raffaello. He asks if he startled her, and she snaps that of course he did. She marches out and demands to know how he even got there. Calmly, he explains that he climbed several walls and slipped through the protective charms placed at every corner. Finally, glancing around, he casually mentions that the manor's security could use some work. Silently, Ginta reflects, it's no surprise he managed that, it was probably due to Aberg's monstrous ability. House Raffaello was renowned for its line of sword masters. The Raffaello family would always produce one sword master of overwhelming strength every century, and it was said that a swing of their sword could crack mountains, part seas, and shatter all forms of magic. And as one might expect, Aberg was the sword's master of that century. She asks if he was finally able to console Sarin, but he responds that they barely had time to talk since her brother whisked her away into her room. Then Sarin asked everyone to leave because she didn't want to talk to anyone that night. Looking at the Duke's sullen expression, she wonders if perhaps he feels sorry because he thinks he wasn't able to keep Sarin safe. Almost immediately she pleads with him not to feel that way, about whatever it is he's feeling. Then she continues, she mentions every decision he made must have been the best possible choice he could make at that time. She adds that the decision he made allowed Sarin to enjoy a safe life there, and no one can deny that. She tells him he made that decision and sacrificed himself, so she just wanted to express her gratitude and respect for what he did. And I'm sure Sarin feels the same way, she finishes. The Duke exhales slowly and calls her name. Then, without warning, he starts walking toward her. Ginta fidgets, unsure why he's closing the distance. She takes a step back, wondering if she said something wrong. But before she can react, he reaches out and catches her. He reminds her that he told her not to run from him. She mumbles that she wasn't running. He brushes a strand of hair away from her face and simply says that he's glad to hear it. His hand gently traces her shoulder, sliding downward. His cold touch sends a jolt through her and she shuts her eyes, overwhelmed by how close he is. She quickly turns around, asking what brought him there. He answers quietly, revealing he had been worried. He needed to make sure she got home safely. She asks if he had waited long, and he replies it was only an hour, leaving her stunned, to ask why she stayed that long. He explains he couldn't escort her back, so he waited. More importantly, he reminds her that they hadn't finished their discussion. She guesses he means the demonic energy poisoning and suggests they talk through the details ahead of time. When he stays quiet, she wonders if she misunderstood, but he assures her that her idea isn't wrong either. Then, he lightly points out that she forgot about him, too busy preparing for the banquet. She denies it and repeats what she had said earlier, that the alchemist needs more information about the demonic energy poisoning, so she plans to visit him again. He asks when she's thinking of going to visit him, suggesting they could go together, and she reveals she was thinking of going there the next day. She mentions she can drop by his laboratory since she'll meet Sarin somewhere outside tomorrow, revealing she and Sarin always spend a day together, whenever they go through anything bad. The Duke points out she wouldn't be able to go alone if she's with Sarin, but she tells him it won't be a problem. All she needs to do is ask her brother to take Sarin off her hands briefly so she can slip away to the lab. The Duke stiffens slightly and repeats her words, brother. Then, narrowing his gaze, he quietly asks, by brother, do you mean Hank Valerian? With a nervous laugh, she admits that yes, she was referring to Hank Valerian. The Duke's expression sharpens instantly, his glare hardens as he begins muttering curses under his breath, calling Hank a sly little fox. While his rant continues, Ginta quietly suggests she'll just visit the laboratory alone. Deep down, she knows she's more comfortable meeting the alchemist by herself anyway. Besides, she could even ask him privately if there's a way to avoid having to meet with the Duke every 2 days. The Duke eventually quiets and remarks that since her brother is the head of House Valerian, he must not be entirely incompetent, so perhaps Hank can be trusted to safely escort Sarin home. Ginta takes that as a way of the Duke testing Hank's competence. She thinks to hurry the Duke home so she could prepare Hank. She wishes him a safe trip back, but instead of leaving, he just sulks. She fidgets under his gaze, confused as to why he's not moving, but at that moment, he suddenly asks why she's trying so hard to make him leave. She reveals she only thought they had already finished discussing everything, but the Duke disagrees, stating things aren't finished until everything is resolved. Still panicked, she insists she only wanted him to head home before it got too late or dangerous. Then it hits her, he never actually brought up the important issue he wanted to discuss. Instead, all this time, he'd just been answering her questions. The Duke then asks if he seems like a coward who would be frightened by the night, asking if that's what she thinks of him, and she says of course not in shares, but she'll feel worried if he had to go home late. He turns around softly repeating her words, worry, then he responds that he shall take his leave before he causes her any worries, but before that, he'll like to hear the answer to the question he asked at the banquet hall. As she asks in confusion if perhaps there's something she didn't answer, it dawns on her, Prince Libio's. She asks if that's what it is about, and with barely any space left between them as he leans forward, he confirms that is indeed what it is about. She asks softly if he thinks she'd done anything wrong back there, explaining that she was so anxious the prince might uncover the Duke's true identity that she barely remembers what was said during their conversation. She asks for a second to recall it, but the Duke stops her. He turns around mentioning she didn't do anything wrong, so she doesn't have to try so hard to remember it. Then, stepping onto the balcony railing, he flashes a smile and says he'll see her tomorrow. She stands there, stunned, a series of questions flood her mind. Did he really just smile? But that wasn't the point. What truly puzzled her was why he'd go through all the trouble of climbing walls in the middle of the night, just to ask her that. Elsewhere, Prince Libio stands overlooking the city. He calls out to Caden and gives him a task. He wants everything there is to know about someone named Nathan Digov by tomorrow, and Caden accepts without question. Then, the prince murmurs two names to himself, Ginta Valerian and Nathan Digov. What was supposed to be another ordinary banquet turned into something else entirely when he met Ginta Valerian. She was a noble woman unlike any other he had encountered, brilliant and composed, wrapped in vivid red. When he tried his usual charm, she didn't fall for it. Instead, she responded coyly with the same hollow words he had used, as though she could see right through him, something most people couldn't tell thanks to his good reputation, but she was different. And then there was Nathan Digov. He got under the prince's skin in other ways, but there was something else, very noticeable. He bore an uncanny resemblance to Duke Raffaello, the man the emperor intended for Deborah. At first, Libios assumed it was just coincidence, but when he looked into Nathan's eyes, a chill ran through him. He had seen those eyes before, those hollow gray eyes. A grin spread across his face as a conclusion formed in his mind. Whether Nathan was actually the Duke or not, it didn't matter. He wanted Ginta Valerian. And if that man really was the Duke, all the better. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and drop a comment if you'd like to see a part 2, which will be the final part of this story.